Bonjour, bonjour. Good evening to everyone. Welcome to our final session for our Get It Right PD series. I hope if you've been able to join before, that you have had a good time. It's a pity I don't have a prize, because I know one teacher here who would be getting a prize for being at every session, and who would probably get another prize for participating in every discussion. She knows herself. And I'll probably have to give a prize to the baby too, right? Because the baby always contributes every time mommy is contributing. I will have to find that teacher and definitely maybe give her a little prize. Don't you think so? I think that's a good idea. But welcome to our final session. This is where we're going to see how all we have been doing for the last 2 weeks will come together. All right. And as always, because I always have a lot to say, people, I really love my job, you know. I get to talk, you know, what's more enjoyable than that? And I get to talk about literacy, and I get to talk with teachers. I mean, it's like the trifecta. So because I always have a lot to say, I will jump right in, right? No more beating around the bush. Now, you know the usual that we've been doing for the last 2 weeks. You can get the session to review it if you like on Facebook. Use the chat for sharing, not just for asking questions, but sharing your comments, sharing your ideas. We will have an opportunity where you can actually unmute and speak. Seize that opportunity if you would like. And remember, this is a safe space for us to learn and for us to share. There will always be additional reading, not so much in this session, because it's more about putting everything together, but you will have the link we will share throughout the session. We will share the link to the folder where we have all of this information in some PDFs and another document with all of the links to additional reading that you can enjoy. So today's session, planning for writing, looking at curriculum standards and outcomes, and maybe we'll talk a bit about some ways that we can integrate the content areas. So let's just do a quick review of what we have looked at in the past sessions. We've looked at the stages of writing. We've linked it to spelling development. We've spoken about the interconnectedness of reading and writing. And we've looked at 3 approaches. The writing workshop, which is a framework for the way that you organize your writing class. We've looked at the 6 traits of writing and looked at how mini lessons are useful for that area, for introducing those traits and then helping students to develop those traits or display those traits in their writing. And we've looked at the writing process as well and how it integrates well with the workshop and the traits. The last session, we looked at tracking students' writing progress, and we had a wealth of information on differentiated instruction, inclusive instruction, backward design, portfolios, assessment tools. And I'm hoping that the backward design, you've been able to get a minute or 2 to look at what it really is about and look at the basis for it. Now, today we'll be putting it all together in our planning process. What can be going through our heads as we're planning to write, or we're planning a writing focused unit? What are the points that we should keep in mind, and how do we use the curriculum standards or outcomes to design instruction? Where can content area come into the picture? Let's find out. So what's our starting point? Generally, we want to have a big idea. That big idea, we can possibly use our content area for inspiration. So perhaps you are studying, or perhaps in the curriculum for science and social studies, you are talking about, you have to study about weather and climate. That may be a way that you can inspire yourself to create a unit around that area, right? Now, of course, we do want to create a writing focused unit. So we want to make sure that it's linked to writing and that what the students will be doing throughout that unit will really be developing their writing prowess. We want to use the backward design approach, begin with the standards. Think about what students need to know, Then highlight what they need to understand and the skills that they must develop. Now, a point at the bottom there, always remember that the reading, writing, listening, speaking, viewing, visually representing skills are all interrelated. Just think of how many skills you are using right now. Just think of how many skills you are using right now in this little session, okay? So let's think about this big idea because it's about writing. Now, because I like, clever sounding titles, I've used this one, using the power of the pen. You know that phrase, the pen is mightier than the sword, right? So we're saying the pen has power. And it's a nice little alliterative title there, right? Nice sounding. Using the power of the pen. So we start with, what would students need to know? And in that case, we think about what the curriculum outcomes are, what the objectives for our unit would be. Now, as the teachers, we know what ideas and structures related to writing our students need to know in order to build necessary writing skills, right? And those generally are the writing structures and particular language techniques. What do students need to understand to be able to do, to be able to itemize this or work this question out? We want to use essential questions. At this stage in our planning process, when we think about what the students need to understand, we focus on creating really deep meaning and understanding in the students. And we do that by using those essential questions. Essential questions help students to learn abstract facts. It helps to stimulate thinking. It leads to deeper understanding of content. Why? Because they are exploring open-ended questions. While they do that, they will come across any knowledge that must be covered in the unit. So this applies not just to the language arts classroom, but to your content area classrooms as well. If you are planning instruction in the content area and you want to use a unit, you should have focusing questions. These are open-ended questions that may inspire other questions and encourage the students to do research, to look at multiple perspectives, to imagine different options. So this is one of our essential questions. How do writers use their craft to make their point? How is this an essential question? How is it good for exploring ideas? Well, because it inspires other questions, such as, who exactly is the writer? What are the kinds of texts that writers produce? Do these texts always have positive effects, or are they always written with positive intention? That's interesting, right? What inspires the writers to create their text in the first place? So we can see that this is a good essential question because it can inspire other questions. And for students to be able to get the answer to that question, they would have to do a lot of exploring, a lot of talking, right? Discussions and so on. Then we want to think about what skills do students need to develop? Clearly, because we are thinking about a writing unit or a writing focus unit, we will think about how should they be able to demonstrate their understandings, and how will they be able to demonstrate that they are using the power of the pen, that they are good writers, that they know what good writers do, and they themselves can demonstrate those very same skills, right? So we may select, because there are so many different types of writing that we can do, right? But we will say, okay, we will focus on exposition and persuasion, because we're looking at how do writers use their craft to make their points, right? So we can think of informing, we can think of persuading. Now, although this unit is writing focused, we will differentiate the writing products that students create. So keep that in mind. Think back to our very first unit where we discussed the different types of writing that are possible, both in and out of the classroom. So here we have it, our big idea. using the power of the pen, and we're going to use this question: how do writers use their craft to make their point, to really inspire the rest of the unit? So now that we have this big idea, we are supposed to move on to the next step, where we determine what the standards are. This is the backwards design approach, right? How do we decide which curriculum standards we're going to use, or which curriculum outcomes we're going to use? Now let's use grade 5 at the primary level as an example, right? And I'm sure you notice for the big idea, it can be used at any level, right? It could be used at the infant level, at the primary level, at the secondary level, whether lower secondary or upper secondary. All we have to do is change the level a bit, maybe change the question for the infant level, right? How do we decide on the standards? Well, we have to actually review those standards, see what's available, and then make a decision on what's the most appropriate. A note about selecting standards. When you are creating a unit, you want to select standards that you are going to assess. We just mentioned that all of the language skills are very much interconnected, which means there will be some writing, there will be some listening, there will be some speaking, obviously, but a lot of it is incidental to the main focus, which is developing writing. So when you select your standards at the primary level, you want to make sure that they are standards that you are going to assess. Assess as in how the students demonstrate that they have mastered this particular standard. So to do that, I am going to go into the OECS standards document for grade 5, and I'm going to look at the writing section. Are you seeing my new screen? Perfect. So this is the strand writing for students in grade 5, and these are the standards. Now, if you notice, there are about 3 different substrands, right? The first substrand is writing for different purposes and audiences. Already looks like something we'd be interested in. Process strategies, definitely something we're interested in, and grammar and mechanics. So here we go. Let's say maybe we will try to get one of each, right, from each of the sections. If we look at the substrand writing for different purposes, we have writing opinion pieces on topics or texts, supporting a point of view with reasons and information. With guidance and support from teachers, use technology to produce and publish writing using keyboarding skills, as well as to interact and collaborate with others. Conduct short research projects that build knowledge about a topic. Prepare a portfolio which shows development of language skills acquired over the year. Should contain examples of varying pieces of writing. Will you not agree that every standard there looks pretty good? Yes, but then how do we decide which one we're going to use? So now we're going to think back. We want to focus on writing. And our essential question is about how writers use their craft to make their points, right? So is it about preparing a portfolio? Are we going to assess that? Unlikely. Are we talking about building knowledge of a specific topic? Also not really. Are we looking at how to use technology to produce text and interact and collaborate with others? Also not necessarily. So this one, write opinion pieces on topics or texts, supporting with a point of view with reasons and information. Now you see these 2 words there? This one, when I see reasons, I see persuasion. And when I see information, I see exposition. So it looks like this standard is a good choice here. Let's look at process strategies. Provide logically ordered reasons that are supported by facts and details. This sounds like this one, right? But if I already have this standard, do I need to use this one? No, I already have that in here. Link opinion and reasons using words and phrases. Is that something that I'm going to specifically assess? That's the question. If this is something that I'm going to teach explicitly and during my writing workshops, I'm looking out for how they're using these transitions, then yes, I would select this. Provide a conclusion related to opinion presented. That seems close to this, right? Produce clear and coherent writing and visual development and organization are appropriate to task, purpose, and audience. With guidance and support from peers and adults, develop and strengthen writing as needed by planning, revising, editing. Self-monitor the use of writing process and writing strategies. Again, what am I going to assess and what would be really suitable for this unit? I would go with this one because in addition to them creating the text, I want to also focus on how they organize and develop it, right? Because I'm saying their purpose is, see, I use the word purpose, to convince someone, their readers, AKA the audience, of their point. So I will select this standard number 4 as the most appropriate one. And for my final section, grammar and mechanics, demonstrate command of the conventions of standard English grammar and usage when writing, demonstrate command of capitalization, punctuation, and spelling, use context as a clue to the meaning of a word or phrase, not very writing oriented, consult reference material to find pronunciation and determine or clarify the precise meaning of keywords and phrases. Again, not something that I'll really be doing consciously and assessing, right? Explain the meaning of figurative language. Use the relationship between particular words to better understand each of the words. Also, ensure subject, verb, and pronoun antecedent agreement. That's very specific, isn't it? Correctly use frequently confused words. Because it's a unit that I'm developing, I would go with this one because it gives me scope to work a lot more, right? I'm looking at grammar and usage. That means I can focus on vocabulary. And remember, I mentioned the language vocabulary that students would need to use when informing and persuading. So this one really works well for the unit. So I went through this whole process to show you how you can go about selecting your standards. And you realize it comes back to questioning yourself, reminding yourself of the purpose of your unit, what it is you really want to accomplish and why, right? So we go back here, language techniques, writing structures, expository, persuasive. So how are the standards that I am selecting meshing with that? So here are my final 3 options, right? Why did I choose this one? Write opinion pieces because I know I want them to inform or educate and persuade. And as I'm doing that, well, looky here, what do we have? Our traits. These are the traits that I can focus on as I am developing mastery of this performance standard. When I select the one on development and organization, purpose and task and audience, I am looking at specific writing structures, right? And for my traits, I have these. Now I can also have voice here again. Why? Because we have audience, right? Purpose and audience. So I can have voice here again too. And finally, when I'm looking at the conventions, voila, I've said it already, we have to look at writing processes, right? And how specifically things like the editing stage and the revising stage and proofreading and so on contributes to bringing across your point effectively as a writer. And the traits that I can use here would be, the traits that I could build into the student's writing would be sentence fluency and conventions. So we see how we bring together all of the ideas that we have, all of that background information that we have as teachers, we bring it to bear on our planning. So I already know how many mini lessons I can do for all of these, right? And then I need to think of the next step. Well, what are my evidences of success that the students have mastered this? But here's what we want students to do, not but. So this is what we want students to be able to do. We want them to provide information effectively. We want them to persuade an audience. We want them to use the correct writing structures or the most effective writing structures based on their purpose and based on their audience. So what are some ways that they can demonstrate mastery? Remember, the second stage is for us to look at what are the assessments that we're going to use for each of those standards that we have, right? Notice, for providing information, students can provide information orally. Students can provide information visually. They can write. Look at the different types of text. They can use technology to share information. Isn't that so? Persuading an audience, they can do that orally, using through a debate or a speech. They can do that visually through advertisements. They can write a letter to the editor, a script, a social media text, and an instant messaging text. In text messages, don't we try to persuade people to do things? I will leave it at that. A lot of you have been trying to persuade people through text messages, right? And of course, what are the writing structures that they could use based on their purpose and their audience? Now, generally, we may have formal structures, right? Imagine you're presenting a speech, or you're making a presentation, you're writing an essay, you're writing an advertisement. And we have informal ways that we will use based on our purpose and our audience, and it will determine the kind of writing structure we will use. So social media, we will use a lot of things like, short posts, what kind of language we will use, blogs, descriptions, captions, and so on. So think of things like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and all of those other platforms. And we can think of our peers, our family, people we interact with every day. There will be informal structures that we use. So overall, we are providing students with a lot of different options. What does that do? It shows respect for the diversities of students. Of course, there are many, many, many more options other than those listed. And if you can think of a few, please put it in the chat so that your peers can have a few ideas. Keep in mind that because this is a learning community, your classroom is a learning community, different grouping structures and arrangements will need to be set up or facilitated. Here's an example. Allow students to decide which activities they would like to work on individually, which ones they would like to work on with peers, okay? With a classmate, with a small group. Some of us need to be left alone to work. Some of us need to speak with other persons before we can understand things clearly. And some of us did a combination. Have a little discussion, try out something physical, then work. So we need to be able to use those flexible grouping options to ensure that we are respecting diversity. Now, please notice, we're just planning, but we're already differentiating from the beginning. And that's the key. This way, you're not giving yourself a lot more work, right? We don't want teachers to see respecting students' differences as doing more work. It's just working smarter, right? And it's working more conscientiously, more mindfully, more consciously. So our next step, now that we've said, okay, we're going to use these ways, now we've just listed them, you're going to turn those into assessment tasks, and you're going to use assessment tools that will measure how well students perform those assessment tasks. Do you see the difference? So the task is what the students do. The tool is what you use or the students use to measure how well they perform that task. So if students are presenting orally, that is the assessment task. They're presenting, they're making a presentation. The tool would be the checklist or the rubric that you would use to assess how well they present. Whether you focus on the content and the way they develop the content orally, or whether you focus on their manner of presentation. So you would have turned all of this into assessment tasks, not summative assessment tasks, not culminating activity assessment tasks. Are we okay? Give me 1 second, please. Thank you for your patience. So I was saying, the assessment tasks that you will design will not just be summative or culminating activities, right? It would be activities that you would design for throughout your lesson. You know what you can do when you think of assessment tasks, etc.? Just think of every assessment task as an activity, and think of every activity as a way for you to collect information from your students. Maybe that's it. That's your assessment. You're collecting information in different ways, right? Make sense? Now that we have those settled, we can now move on to the next step, which is designing the activities that we're going to use for this lesson, right? When we're designing these activities, we're answering the questions. What will students have to do in order to develop mastery? Notice here, our question is, what will they do to demonstrate mastery? And we're saying they should be able to do any or all or a combination of these types of activities to demonstrate their mastery of this skill. Now we're asking, what are the activities I will need to do to get them up to the level where they can perform any of these that we just looked at on the previous slide? As you're designing your activities, start thinking of all the other language arts skills that should be support writing. I have no idea where the reading came from. Somebody, while I was sleeping, changed that word on my slide. But think of all the other language arts skills that support writing, including receptive skills of listening, viewing, and reading. That's how we take in information, right? And think of other skills such as speaking and visually representing, ways that we share information. Think also of student abilities and student strengths. Think of what each person in the community contributes to classroom life. We have talents, we have abilities, we have preferences, we have interests. Talents, abilities, preferences, interests. So you have some students who like talking. We'll not mention anybody on the screen here who likes talking. Some students like singing, they like music. Well, even if it's not singing, maybe they like producing music, or even listening to music, or even using music to do other things. Some like acting, they're very physical, they want to be involved, they want to demonstrate. Some like drawing. Others are really good with technology. Some are very good at organizing. So whenever people are in a group, the foreman, there's always a foreman to direct people where they should go and what they should do. And there are students who are really good at creating. Now, creativity alone has so many options, right? Some love building as well. Okay? We can use these ways, looking at the language arts skills and looking at the differences or the diversities of our students to now design activities. Now, I hope in all the talking that I've been doing so far, your mind has been going a mile a minute, because here's a time now for you, based on this slide here, to tell me what are some ideas that have come to your mind already about activities that you would do in a unit such as this one, where you focused on writing, where your big idea is about the power of the pen and how writers get their ideas or their messages across to their readers. Thinking about students, about the language arts skills and students' diversities, what kinds of learning activities would you design? Talk to me. I will put some pictures there to help you, to inspire you. I will go back to the slide on ways that students can demonstrate mastery. So think about this. These are things you want students to be able to do throughout the unit. So what kinds of activities would you design? I see someone has put in the chat, posters, right? So getting the students to create posters. That's actually pretty complex. Web quest, flyers, pretty complex because it requires a combination of text and images, font sizes, font colors. Remember the trait of presentation as well. So balancing out that space that you have. Comic strips, poems to depict ideas. Love that. Also, you're just shy to talk. Okay, it's okay. Keep giving me in the chat. Love those ideas. Anything to do with students who like to move? Social stories using book creator. Rapping, there we go. Think about your students at the secondary level as well. Slogans, creating slogans. Genre segment, yes, that's popular. Jingles or songs. Advertisements and jingles. You know, and think about the things young people love now, what they're into. A dance on a theme, advertisements, yes. Technology integration, anyone? What about those TikTok type of videos? Yeah, students who have some good talent in that area. That's true, you are right, book creator is technology. Voiceovers, that is interesting. Doing a voiceover, I like that. So you see how many ideas we have here? Now tell me which one of these ideas are not related to exposition and persuasion. They all are. Look at the list here. Save some of those ideas. Very, very, very good suggestions. And as long as we keep thinking of the different language arts skills, that already opens up a world of opportunities that we can use. All of these, viewing and visually representing, and then thinking about what the students come with. That's a whole other ball game, right? So we have so many options for activities that you can use. Animations using Premiere Pro. Miss Alexis, you'll have to host another PD. You'll have to host the next PD session. Talk to us about some of these strategies, it looks like. So look at all of these options that you have for designing activities. And you know what's also interesting? How about sharing with your students what this unit is about, the skills that they're going to build, what it is you want to accomplish as a class, as a community, and asking them for ways that they would like to demonstrate to the class how they have mastered those things. Ask them to think about things that they're very good at. Sometimes we don't know we're good at something because it's just something that we do all the time, right? So ask them, what do you do all the time? What do you think you're good at? It may seem very random, but we can see how it contributes to the classroom community. These are some ways to develop ideas as you're developing your units. They may be at the beginning of a class while you're waiting for persons to come in. If you're at the secondary level, you ask them some questions. You know, if we had to do a unit on so-and-so, what are some activities you'd like to do? You may have to tweak some of them a bit, but you can definitely get some good ideas from your students. Now, so far, as we've been going through this, we've been talking about some areas where you can integrate content, the content areas. But here are some more explicit things that you can do if you want to integrate content area. You can do this even at the secondary level, right? I know sometimes when you're at a secondary level, you have a homeroom and you may be teaching the homeroom, right? You may be teaching them, maybe you're teaching them language arts, or you're teaching them a content area subject. You can still integrate. Why? Because every language arts skill is needed to explore content. By right, you know, if you think of in the English language subject, are there topics there, you know, whether and no, they all come from the content areas. And in every content area, students need to be able to read, to write, to visually represent, to view, to speak, to listen. Isn't that true? So When we are looking for big ideas for our units, we can think of what other topics are students doing at this time, or the time that I'll be implementing this unit. What topics will they be doing? Now, at the primary level, pretty easy, right? You can look into your curriculum guide and say, you know what? I think these two subjects, I can create a thematic unit with these big ideas and then focus on some specific language and skills that I want students to develop, right? You can speak with another teacher at a secondary level who is maybe doing a content area subject and find out, what are you doing? What are some of the topics and ideas that you're exploring there, right? History, and use the history content to do things like learning how to write letters, whether they're formal or informal letters, how to do speeches, how to create timelines, right? How to explain something in chronological order. There are so many options there. When you're creating, for instance, let's say you're creating a writing unit, a writing focus unit like this one that we just used as an example, I gave you one essential question or focusing question, but you can have several of them. And you can take a topic from a subject area, a content area, and include it as a focusing question. It will direct students to particular content that they will learn while they're working out the answers, okay? And finally, have students write in your content area subjects. Now, how would they do that? At the beginning of a lesson, you can say, we're going to be studying trees for the next 2 weeks or whatever it is, or leaves or flowers or whatever. Create a word cloud with all of the words or ideas that come to mind when you hear the word flower. And then they would write, and then they could share that. That's writing. You can ask them to, at the end of a lesson, what are some of the things you've learned in this session? And you can give them a formula poem that they could use. Very simple. On the first line, write the topic. On the second line, write 2 words that describes how you felt as you were learning this information. On the third line, write a simile that whatever, I mean, you can create it. You literally can create any kind of formula poem that you want. And of course, as they reflect on their learning experiences, you can have them maybe do simple journal entries. Now, sometimes you can have them do journal entries in the form of audio. You can have them maybe record their thoughts, and post it in. If they have an online journal, they post their thoughts there. You can have them write it out. Now, of course, we're talking about students who may have a little difficulty writing. You can have them post in their journal any way that they want. Some persons may want to write, some persons may want to illustrate. It doesn't matter. Once they're getting that pen on the paper or, typing, whatever, then it's definitely a writing experience for that student. I hope these are some good ideas that you can use for ways that you can integrate content. And I'm sure that as we think back to our writing focused unit, we did not specify any content, because one of the ways you can get content ready is to, as you have students write, imitate those writers who are getting their points across, you can have them select their own topics that they'd want to create, their expository pieces, their advertisements, their speeches, their demonstrations, their presentations, their posters, their picket, whatever it is you call it. You can get them to select ideas from their content areas to develop the content, the actual content for the units that they will be writing on. Okay? I know it's exciting and we could keep going on, but we've actually come to the end, not just of this session, but of our little series. So you may be wondering, what next? How do I get through next week without seeing Miss Carglin? It's okay. It's okay. You will be okay, because you'll have some work to do. Here's what you can do. Review the contents, review the materials. There, it's in the shared folder. I put in last week's sessions separately, but I've put in a complete document with everything from this session, including this session, and all of the links, right? Review it. Discuss with some colleagues. They may have been at the session, they may not, but you could share some ideas with them. See if maybe they want to collaborate with you, or they want to co-plan, they want to co-teach. Select even if it's one thing that you learned from these 6 sessions. It could be the planning approach, it could be the writing workshop, it could be the writing process, the traits. Try it out in your class. Keep track of how you're doing, how your students are doing. Share that feedback, share your progress, then share it with me as well, okay? Post online about how this strategy is working for you. And most importantly, celebrate your successes. And I can guarantee you, if you're not tracking, you will not realize how well you are doing and how much you are doing and how much progress you and your students are making. Be assured that even if it's just your mindset about what you're teaching and how you're teaching has changed, that is already a success. Okay, it will take a while for you to see this reflected in how your students perform, but know that once your own mindset has changed, you are already having a success moment. You already have something to celebrate. Okay, and before you go, I know you love my polls, I can tell. I'm going to give you the final poll. It may take you a minute or two longer than the others, but please give me your feedback. Really appreciate that. And thank you very much for being here. Okay, so I will look out for your feedback on the poll. There are questions asking about what it is you want next from me. So please, please, please respond, and that's the only way I'm going to know if I should keep doing this or retreat to my den. There's no den, people. Just being dramatic. I hope that you can all see the poll. Oh, I wonder if it's the version of Zoom that you're using, because I noticed that was one of the points made as I was preparing the poll. It depends on the version of Zoom. You might not even see the poll. But you know what, Miss? I think you can let me know. What we're asking is, were the sessions informative to you? And do you feel that you could implement the ideas? So you could just tell me yes or no in the chat. Do you feel that you could, that this was informative and that you could implement the ideas in your writing instruction? Whether the facilitator was knowledgeable and engaging. The first option is yes, even though she used the word right a lot. Because it's a writing PD, that's why I was saying right so much. Would you be interested in additional PD sessions in the area of writing? Would you be interested in PD sessions in other literacy areas, such as implementing independent reading in your class, getting familiar with the language arts curriculum, and helping your students develop oral language? And you could also leave a comment, yes to all. You could also leave a comment for me, either about the delivery or about the content. And if it's okay with you for me to share that, share your comment, if I want to maybe post it online to encourage others to go back and view the sessions, then just include your name so I can say that this person gave that feedback. It's been great being with you people. I know that you are not shy, because if we were together in person, our sessions would go up to 9 p.m. 9 p.m. But I suspect you are just Zoom shy. But it's been great. Please check the chat for the link to the folder. Make sure it's in your shared with me drive so that you can go back to it whenever you like. The recordings are all on Facebook, so you can just go over there on Angel Z Caglin and get access. Okay? Au revoir. Bye-bye. Dede. Do we have Messages in the chat. Okay. Once you've completed the survey, thank you very much for being here and see you next time.